Before the story begins, please write in the comments section which state or region you are listening to this narrative from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that the channel Secrets of Marriage can continue to grow and offer even more fascinating stories. That night became the longest and most torturous in Eleanor's life. As a devoted wife with deep-rooted traditional values, she always tried to support her husband under any circumstances. She herself had pressed her husband's tailored suit in their Manhattan apartment, ensuring that Preston looked impeccable before all his colleagues. The corporate gala to celebrate the successes of Preston's firm was being held in the spectacular Temple of Dindur Hall at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with 200 exclusive guests in attendance. The sound of live, classical music accompanied the steps of the attendees, who exchanged smiles and cordial conversation. Eleanor sat silently in a corner. She wore a dark, extremely modest dress and an omlud tan-tu arte, elegant wrap covering her shoulders neatly, a reflection of her staunch convictions and modesty. Her gaze did not waver from the figure of her husband, standing in the center of the crowd. Preston was laughing loudly with a glass of Napa Valley Cabernet in his hand, receiving praise from top executives for having achieved a coveted executive position on Wall Street. Eleanor could only manage a faint smile seeing her husband so full of himself. However, in the bottom of her heart, she knew perfectly well who had drafted all the business plans that had led Preston to the pinnacle of success. Eleanor had sacrificed so many things for him. She possessed a privileged intelligence for designing business strategies in the American market, but she had decided to hide her talent. Every night, while Preston slept deeply, Eleanor sat in front of her laptop to draft balance sheets, analyze the domestic market, and type up the project drafts that Preston would take to the office the next morning, passing them off as his own ideas. Eleanor did all that motivated by love and matrimonial devotion. She firmly believed in the eyes of God that her husband's success was the happiness of their home, but Preston's treatment of her had started to change lately. The higher his position, the more arrogant he became. Preston had begun to belittle Eleanor frequently, treating her like a simple housewife who didn't understand the toughness of the corporate world. Eleanor's thoughts vanished when a woman approached her. It was Candace, a co-worker of Complice, Preston's, who had always shown hostile attitudes toward Eleanor. Candace looked her up and down with evident disdain. "What a pity to see you sitting here alone, Eleanor. While your husband shines out there in the center, you look like an outsider who stumbled into the wrong place. This room is full of people with MBAs from Ivy League business schools and a vital role in the Plast Fortune 500. Surely you feel very bored because you don't understand anything we're talking about," Candace said with a sarcastic tone. Eleanor remained calm and did not respond to Candace's provocations. She didn't want to cause a scene on her husband's most important night. She just lowered her head, hoping the woman would leave soon. However, Eleanor's silence emboldened Candace even more. She let out a giggle and moved away to rejoin Preston's group. From a distance, Eleanor could see Candace whispering something into Preston's ear, and then both laughed together while looking sideways toward her corner. A stabbing pain pierced her chest, but Eleanor endured it with all her strength. She convinced herself that she just had to hold on for a couple more hours until the event ended. Suddenly, the master of ceremonies requested the attention of everyone present. The culminating moment was about to begin. Preston was called to the main stage to give a speech for his extraordinary achievements that quarter. Applause and cheers resonated under the immense high ceilings of the museum. Preston walked up the steps, brimming with confidence, took the microphone and started spouting bombastic phrases about effort, future vision, and perseverance. Everyone listened with admiration. Preston was savoring his moment of glory. But what happened next was something no one could have imagined. Least of all, Eleanor. In the middle of his speech, Preston suddenly pointed toward the corner where she was sitting. A powerful spotlight immediately illuminated Eleanor, blinding her and leaving her bewildered. The gazes of the 200 guests bore into her. Preston smiled, maliciously, a smile that made Eleanor's heart race wildly. Preston stepped off the stage, walked toward Eleanor, and grabbed her by the arm roughly. She tried to resist, but her husband's strength was overwhelming. Preston dragged her up onto the stage in front of 400 eyes, watching them full of intrigue. Ladies and gentlemen, you all know that behind a great man there is a great woman. But let's be honest, not all women are worth the same. Look at the beesus. Woman I have beside me, proclaimed Preston loudly, breaking the silence. Eleanor lowered her head with eyes about to fill with tears. She didn't know what her husband was plotting, but her instinct screamed that it was something terrible. She is my wife. But what does she do every day? Just cook meatloaf, vacuum the house, and fold laundry. She knows absolutely nothing about the big business we handle in Midtown. She hasn't contributed an iota to my success tonight. In fact, sometimes I feel like she's dead weight keeping me from flying higher, Preston exclaimed again, this time with a deeply humiliating tone. Some guests started laughing upon Preston, hearing Preston's words. Candace, who was in the front row, was the one laughing the hardest. Eleanor felt her world collapsing. The man she had helped with all her energy and intellect, the man she had served with devotion, was destroying her dignity. In front of hundreds of people, tears began to slide down Eleanor's cheeks, but Preston hadn't finished yet. He brought the microphone closer to his lips. Tonight, to celebrate my success, I want to propose a little game. I am auctioning off this useless wife for $10 miserable. Who wants her to scrub dishes in their house? Yelled Preston while laughing uproariously. Laughter erupted throughout the hall. Hundreds of guests mocked Eleanor. The sound of their laughter rumbled like thunder in her ears. She felt despicable, useless, and trampled upon. No one in the entire room came to her defense. Everyone seemed to enjoy the humiliation and suffering she was enduring. Preston looked at her with satisfaction, feeling so powerful that he believed he could do whatever he pleased. However, amidst that painful din of mockery, a deep, serene voice cut through the noise sharply. It wasn't a shout, but somehow it managed to silence the entire museum gallery. I will pay $3 million. The laughter ceased instantly. A sepulchral silence crept through every corner of the venue. Preston, who until then was laughing heartily, froze. He sought the origin of the voice. At the opposite end of the hall, a tall man dressed in an impeccable, tailored suit and emanating imposing authority was standing. The man stared fixedly toward the stage with piercing, lethal eyes. The man advanced slowly, allowing the light to reveal his face clearly. Eleanor looked up and saw him. She was stupefied. She knew that face from the national brackless financial press. It was Sterling Vance, the CEO of the gigantic corporate holding company that had just acquired the firm where Preston worked. Preston's face, previously full of pride, paled until it turned the color of wax. The hand holding the microphone began to shake violently as he realized who had spoken. Vance's steps resonated firmly, breaking the absolute silence enveloping those present. None of the 200 guests dared to even breathe. They were aware that the figure heading to the stage was the ultimate authority, holding the professional future of all of them in his hands. Vance was a young leader known for his iron fist, his strategic brilliance, and because he never joked with his words. His mere presence at that gala was already a major surprise, and much more so, his intervention in the shameful incident caused by Preston. Preston stepped back when Vance walked up the stairs to the stage. A cold sweat began to break out on his forehead. All his arrogance evaporated, replaced by paralyzing terror. He understood he had gone too far, but he didn't understand at all why the big boss was intervening in his tasteless joke. Vance stood right in front of Preston, without directing a single word to the trembling executive. He took an official corporate bonus document and a luxury fountain pen out of his briefcase. He signed the concession clause with quick but deliberate movements. Upon finishing, he threw the binding contract directly at Preston's chest. The document fluttered for an instant in the air before falling to the floor, next to the tips of Preston's patent leather shoes. He looked down, and his eyes opened wide. It was an objective-based bonus contract, worth $3 million, an astronomical and absurd figure for a simple mockery. Take that money. As of this second, she is no longer your concern. Sentenced. Vance, with a voice so cold it chilled to the bone. Preston was left speechless. He opened and closed his mouth without emitting any sound. He looked at Vance and then at Eleanor alternately. Meanwhile, Vance looked away from Preston and focused on Eleanor, who remained standing, trembling with the trail of tears on her cheeks. Vance's fierce gaze softened upon seeing the woman in the wrap. Without hesitation, he extended his right hand, took Eleanor by the wrist gently but firmly, and pulled her to move her away from Preston. Eleanor, still stunned and in a state of shock, could only let herself be led by him. She walked off the stage alongside the magnate. The crowd of guests thronging in front of them parted automatically, opening an Asidio aisle so both could leave. Candace, who before was laughing jaw-droppingly loud, now seemed like a statue petrified by panic. She bowed her head deeply when Vance passed by her side. No one dared to sustain his gaze. Vance led Eleanor out of that majestic historical building. The crisp night air of New York hit Eleanor's face, bringing a little calm to her chaotic mind. In front of the main entrance on Fifth Avenue, a dark, high-end luxury car waited with the engine running. A suited bodyguard rushed to open the rear door. Vance invited Eleanor to enter first before sitting beside her. The door closed, and the luxurious vehicle slowly moved away from the museum vicinity, leaving behind Preston and the pieces of his destroyed dignity. Inside the spacious and soundproofed cabin, the atmosphere was very tense. Eleanor sat rigidly, clutching the edge of her skirt. She still couldn't fully assimilate what had just happened. In a single night, she had been humiliated before hundreds of people, discarded by her own husband, in the cruelest way, and then rescued by a billionaire she didn't know, personally. She mustered up the courage and turned her face toward Vance, who was leaning back relaxedly, looking out the window toward Central Park. "Why did you do this, sir?" asked Eleanor with a broken voice. "I possess nothing. I am just a wife whose husband just repudiated her. Why were you willing to disperse such a fortune?" Vance slowly turned his head to look at her. There was no trace of pity or compassion on his face, but rather an analytical and determined look. "I didn't buy you, Eleanor. Get that degrading idea out of your head," he responded serenely. "Then Why did you give that huge amount of money to Preston and take me out of there? She insisted. This time, demanding an explanation, Vance straightened his posture, opened a small compartment near his seat, and took out a thick brown leather folder. He handed it to Eleanor, placing it on her lap. She looked at the folder suspiciously and opened it slowly. She turned, page after page, and her eyes dilated upon seeing the content. Inside were copies of major urban development projects, company data analyses, expansion, strategies for the American market, and small notes in the margins that she knew perfectly. All that was the fruit of her own intellect over the last 5 years, the work she always handed to Preston in the shadows. I got you out of there because I know your greatest secret of this last half-decade, Eleanor, said Vance, breaking the silence of the vehicle. She looked at him with total disbelief. How did you get all this? Preston always made sure to erase any trace of my name on the reports. Before my board of directors approved the acquisition of the company where your husband works, I ordered an exhaustive audit. I read all of Preston's business plans. They were brilliant. However, when I interviewed him personally, his reasoning was incredibly superficial. He only had the gift of gab, but lacked a real understanding of what he was presenting. I tasked a corporate security team to investigate his movements and discovered a fascinating truth. All key documents were sent from the router in your suburban home in the early hours of the morning. Through a deeper IT trace, I discovered that the genius in the back shadows was you, his own wife. Eleanor fell silent. All the arduous work she had jealously hidden to protect. Her husband's reputation had been discovered by the big boss. Your husband is a fool who just threw a diamond into the trash to keep a vulgar stone. He auctioned off the brain behind his successes for $10. I just took advantage of his stupidity. Those $3 million aren't to buy you as merchandise, Eleanor. They are the first step to tear out his arrogance at the Dauphin root. And I need you by my side to finish the job, Vance explained with a voice loaded with assurance. Eleanor closed the folder. Her shattered heart began to fill with a different sensation. Vance's explanation seemed to awaken something that had been dormant inside her for years. The consciousness that she wasn't useless. The certainty that she was worth a lot. And the conviction that she deserved much better treatment than being the public laughingstock. The car continued advancing along the illuminated avenues of the capital, taking her toward a new life that would alter her destiny forever. In the gloom of the vehicle, silence embraced Eleanor. Her mind went back 5 years in time. She remembered every long, early morning in front of the monitor, balancing figures and designing marketing plans until her eyes burned. She had made those sacrifices altruistically, just to see the smile of pride on Preston's face. She had suffocated her own ambitions and buried her dream of being an independent woman in the corporate world, all so that he could rise, victorious in such a competitive environment. But the payment she had received that night annihilated any remnant of trust and respect she might feel toward him. Being shamed, vexed, and sold like scrap before dozens of witnesses was an incurable wound. Vance remained quiet, giving her time to assimilate the blank.org revelation. He knew that tearing down loyalty built over years was not a simple process, but he also saw the enormous hidden potential in her. The determination, talent, and resilience of this woman would be lethal weapons if aimed in the right direction. He was not going to allow such a gift to be wasted because of a conceited man who didn't know how to value his spouse. Mr. Vance. Eleanor called him with a voice that now sounded much firmer and surer. Her tears had dried. leaving behind a sharp look full of resolve. What exactly do you want from me? You said you want to destroy Preston's pride. But why do you need my help? You are the chairman of a financial giant. You could fire him tomorrow and sink his career in the blink of an eye. He turned his head and sketched a faint smile. A very calculated smile. Firing him would be too benevolent a punishment, Eleanor. If I just kick him out, he'll leave my company with a juicy severance package and look for work elsewhere. He'll continue believing himself a genius and will tell lies to all of New York saying that I fired him because I felt threatened by his talent. People like Preston never learn if they only lose a job. He has to lose absolutely everything. He has to realize how insignificant he is when you are not behind him to sustain him. I want his own greed and incompetence to sink him. Eleanor listened to him attentively. Vance's words were tough, but they had crushing logic. I offer you a mutually beneficial agreement, he continued, looking her in the eyes. Help me unmask Preston's farce, formally before the entire board, directors. Prove to them who the real brain behind the numbers in his department is. In exchange, I will give you legal protection against any reprisal he tries to take. And what is more important, I will grant you the position that by right belongs to you, a top-tier executive role. Help me bring his rot to light, and I guarantee you will obtain the justice you deserve. She remained silent for a few seconds, clenching her fists on her lap. She recalled Preston's contemptuous laugh, Candace's venomous look, and the applause of those who mocked her. The pain in her chest gradually transformed into burning fire. She could no longer afford to be the submissive woman crying in a corner. She had to resurge and show the world, and especially Preston, who she really was. Eleanor took a deep breath, held Vance's gaze bravely, and nodded, with a decisive gesture. I accept, she said firmly. I will do whatever is necessary to recover my dignity and put an end to all of Preston's lies. Vance nodded, satisfied. The luxury car turned to enter the exclusive and guarded streets of a wealthy Westchester estate, heading toward an elegant mansion that Vance had arranged as a temporary and safe refuge for Eleanor. That night marked the turning point that would rewrite her history. The next morning, Preston's mood was radically opposite to that of his wife. He woke up in his bed with immeasurable euphoria. He didn't dedicate a single thought to Eleanor's whereabouts, nor how she might have spent the night. His only concern was focused on the valuable piece of paper resting on the nightstand. A check for $3 million, a figure that made him feel like the king of the world. He already visualized a chalet in Aspen, a German sports car, and major Cianodius, investments that would turn him into a titan of business. Candace had called him first thing, praising his bravery the previous night and fantasizing about a previous future together bathed in luxury. Dressed in his best suit, Preston walked stompingly into the J.P. Morgan Chase branch in Midtown Manhattan. He walked past the line of ordinary clients and went directly to the priority service desk. An employee received him with a professional smile. Preston tossed the signed contract onto the desk with a boastful gesture, demanding that the Graduhaven desk executive credit line linked to that document be activated toward his checking account. The employee looked at the figure on the document, and then at Preston with astonishment. She apologized and got up to call the branch manager, as an operation of that caliber required special authorization. Preston leaned back in the padded chair, crossed his legs arrogantly, and waited, feeling like the master of the universe. Shortly after, a mature man, the bank manager, approached Preston. He carried the check and a thick folder of files. His countenance was grave, in clear contrast to the executive's wide smile. "Good morning, Mr. Preston." "We have verified this check," said the manager, resting the documents on the table. "Perfect. Then transfer the total immediately to my personal account." "I have a very tight schedule today," interrupted Preston arrogantly. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Preston. However, these funds are retained and cannot be credited to any personal account," responded the manager unhurriedly. Preston's smile vanished instantly. "What do you mean retained?" "That check bears the signature of Sterling Vance, the chairman of the holding company I work for. Do you think he doesn't have funds? Do you doubt my boss's solvency?" "Not at all, sir. The capital exists and is backed, but this contract is subject to very strict legal clauses protected under corporate law. These millions are conditioned to the corporate entity, not your free disposal, and have the legal status of an execution guarantee for the project. You do not have any authority to collect this bonus in advance, nor to divert it to your private account, without presenting audited results to Mr. Vance's legal department." Preston was left speechless. His heart started beating at full speed as reality hit him. He hadn't taken home a millionaire prize, but a contractual link he didn't understand at all. Panic began to cloud his mind upon understanding that the game had only just begun. Preston staggered out of the bank office. The warm morning air felt suddenly freezing to him. His head was a mess trying to process the manager's convoluted explanation. The fortune he had bragged about so much, the one that was supposedly going to turn him into a magnate overnight, was a mirage. The money was there, but it was untouchable. And what was worse, the mentions of guarantees and corporate obligations gives him a very bad feeling. Just when he was about to open his car door in the parking lot, his phone rang, shrilly. It was a blocked number. With a trembling hand, he picked up. A masculine voice, very formal and authoritarian, resonated in the receiver. The man identified himself as the director of the legal team of Vance's holding company. Preston's pulse accelerated even more. "Good morning, Mr. Preston. I am calling to formalize that you accepted last night the guarantee bond of $3 million, said the lawyer, getting straight to the point. "Yes, I have it, but at the bank they tell me I can't touch it." "What does all this mean?" "Your boss handed it to me in public as a legitimate payment," protested Preston, raising his voice to hide his terror. "Remain calm. Mr. Vance is a businessman who operates strictly under U.S. law. The check you picked up is the operational guarantee for Project Hudson, that grand plan you yourself presented before the board. According to the new internal regulations, any director who physically accepts this bond accept in a binding manner the conditions of the execution contract. You have the unextendable deadline of 1 month to implement the project and achieve the profit margins that you yourself projected in your document." Preston swallowed saliva with great difficulty. "And what happens if there are logistical unforeseen events, or if it gets delayed?" "That is the commercial risk you assumed upon taking the paper from Mr. Vance's hands. If within 30 days you fail in your objective, it will be considered a serious breach of contract. The stipulated penalty demands an indemnification of 100 times the value of the bond, in addition to the corresponding criminal actions for a crime of fraud according to penal code. We have your signature on the proposal assuming authorship. Have a productive day, Mr. Preston. The clock is already ticking." The call cut off before he could articulate a syllable. He remained petrified, next to the car door, unable to take a step 100 times. 3 million was a sum he could never pay in his entire life, not even selling his organs. The threat of entering prison for fraud loomed over him like a bloodthirsty monster. He jumped into the vehicle and drove recklessly toward his office. Upon arriving at his office, he locked the door, turned on the computer, and opened all the files for Project Hudson that he had remitted to the board of directors. While reading page after page, he felt like his head was going to explode. The document was plagued with complex financial algorithms, domestic market balance sheets, and operational forecasts that were incomprehensible to him. The letters and numbers seemed like hieroglyphics. For years, Preston had dedicated himself only to memorizing a couple of key paragraphs drafted by his wife to show off in meetings. He didn't have the remotest idea how to set that corporate giant in motion. The brain behind that masterpiece was Eleanor. She had created it all. She understood the flow of the business, and only she could save him from the abyss. Preston jumped up. Panic mutated into pure desperation. He had to find Eleanor immediately. He was convinced that his wife would be out there crying her eyes out, waiting for him to go pick her up and apologize. In his delusion of grandeur, he continued believing that his submissive wife would never dare to defy a direct order of his. Thanks to the contacts of a subordinate, Preston managed to find out the address of the place where Vance's car had taken her the previous night. He drove at full speed toward the indicated location. He expected to find a modest little apartment or a shabby shelter. However, upon arriving at the wealthy Westchester estate, he ran into an imposing mansion surrounded by high walls and exquisitely tended gardens. He parked poorly on the sidewalk, got out of the car, and ran toward the robust, wrought iron gate. "Eleanor, come out right now. I know you're in there," bellowed Preston while pounding on the bars furiously. "You have to come home now and get to work on the project. Don't annoy me anymore with your childish tantrums." His shouts took effect. A pedestrian door adjacent to the main gate opened, but the docile housewife he expected didn't appear, but rather 4 private security guards from a top firm, enormous and dressed in black suits. Quickly they formed a barrier in front of Preston, preventing him from taking another step. He tried to push them, but one of the guards repelled him without the slightest effort. When Preston was about to unleash a string of insults, the heavy automatic gate began to open slowly. His gaze diverted toward the figure coming out onto the porch of the mansion. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He held his poor breath, seeing the picture. There was Eleanor, the woman whom for years he had only seen in baggy clothes and worn aprons. Now she looked spectacular. She wore a tailored suit jacket of impeccable cut, surely from some boutique on Madison Avenue, that outlined her figure and radiated the authority of a high executive. Her hairstyle and makeup enhanced a face full of dignity. There remained not a single trace of sadness or tears in her, just a glacial, incisive look brimming with power. Eleanor remained at the top of the steps, observing a pathetic and disheveled Preston behind the gate. Such a metamorphosis left Preston speechless. He understood instinctively that the woman in front of him was not the servant he could boss around with 4 shouts. The real chess match had just begun. Preston remained nailed to the sidewalk. He didn't blink. He rubbed his eyes, resisting believing what he saw. The submissive Eleanor, the one with the lowered gaze and always secluded in the kitchen, now radiated intimidating majesty. The woman looking at him with so much ice in her eyes seemed like an intaum, impregnable titan. The four guards continued acting as a containment wall. The morning wind swayed, the trees of the estate, adding more tension to the atmosphere. Preston clenched, his fists. His alpha male ego felt trampled upon seeing his wife guarded by his boss's henchmen. He tried to regulate his agitated breathing, hardened his countenance, and shouted, breaking the calm of the neighborhood. "What do you think you're doing here, Eleanor? Stop playing games and pack the bags. We're going home right now. You have a brutal amount of work pending for my project. Don't piss me off anymore with this little girl tantrum," he demanded with a martial tone, hoping his usual tone would daunt his wife. Eleanor didn't even flinch. She descended the steps with deliberate slowness and crossed grace. Every step of hers was a slap to Preston's dwindling ego. She stopped at a prudent distance, shielded behind her guards. She observed her husband's face, fixedly, studying the features of the man she had loved so much and who now only produced profound repulsion in her. "I am already in my house, Preston. I don't intend to ever return to yours much. Less am I going to lift a finger for that absurd project you have no damn clue about. From today on, you're going to have to squeeze your own brain to keep the big job you brag so much about," answered Eleanor with a flat voice, but sharp, like a scalpel, wounding him in the deepest part of his vanity. Preston was left stunned. In all their years of marriage, she had never dared to talk back to him. He swallowed saliva and decided to change tactics. He knew shouts and threats weren't going to work in that situation. He relaxed his face, putting on that expression of a slaughtered lamb and false repentance that also worked for him to bamboozle investors. "Eleanor, listen to me, please. What happened last night at the Met was just a heavy joke. I let myself get carried away by the pressure of the position. You already know how much I strive for our future. I ask for your forgiveness. If my words offended you, I swear to you by the most sacred that it won't happen again. But now give your husband a hand. You know they are going to sink me into misery. If that project fails, are you really capable of watching how they destroy the man you love? Be a good wife and help me just this time," pleaded Preston with a honeyed voice. Eleanor smiled ironically. There was no warmth in that gesture, but pure contempt. She shook her head slightly, feeling pity for the moral baseness of the individual in front of her. "You put a price on my honor in front of hundreds of people, and you call it a heavy joke? You considered my loyalty of 5 years as dead weight. Save that theater for your fake friends in the luxury box at Yankee Stadium. Preston, for me, this ended the very instant you put a price on my dignity," sentenced Eleanor. Next, she signaled to one of the guards, who handed her an official folder. With firm step, Eleanor approached the gate a little more and extended it to Preston, through the bars. "Here, sign it today," she ordered. Preston took the documents with trembling hands. Upon reading the heading of the first page, his eyes almost popped out. It was a contested divorce lawsuit. His heart skipped a beat. He looked at Eleanor with murderous rage. His dreams, his status, his freedom, everything hung by a thread, and the only key to save himself was handing him divorce papers. "You're crazy. I will never sign this. Do you think you can get away? Scotangent free, after everything I've given you? Without me, you are a zero to the left. You're just a gold digger hiding under Vance's skirts," bellowed Preston, while tearing the lawsuit to shreds and throwing the pieces into the air. The pieces of paper fell scattered on the sidewalk. Eleanor was not surprised at the outburst. She knew that Coward would react like that. She looked at the torn papers and then at him with pity. That was just a copy. You can destroy 1,000 sheets if you want, but the judicial process will continue its course. Enjoy the little arrogance you have left today, Preston, because tomorrow you will have lost absolutely everything, she said coldly. Without giving him time to reply, she turned around and returned inside the mansion. The guards closed the automatic gate with a crash. Preston was left alone in the street, spitting curses and swearing revenge, convinced that he was going to destroy Eleanor and demonstrate to the entire corporate sector that he was a genius in his own right. The next morning, the office tower in Midtown Manhattan was a beehive of activity. An extraordinary general meeting of the board of directors was scheduled. The presence of all area directors was required, since Chairman Vance himself was going to present the person who would occupy the position of chief operating officer. Preston adjusted the knot of his silk tie in front of the bathroom mirror. He had spent the night awake, rehearsing evasions and excuses. He was convinced that if they asked him for details of the project, his usual verbosity would get him out of trouble, and he would fool the board members again. While walking toward the immense boardroom on the top floor, he crossed paths with Candace. She approached quickly with a knowing smile, visibly excited about the meeting. You look stunning today, Preston. Surely you'll have the board in your pocket with your Project Hudson. And about your village wife, forget about her. She was never up to the task for a winner like you, Candace whispered while fixing the task for a winner. Lapels of his blazer well. Preston puffed out his chest, feeding his ego with those flatteries he needed so much. Of course, I am going to demonstrate to them that I am the most profitable asset in this building. Let's go in and leave them with their mouths open. Both entered the spectacular room with views of the Manhattan skyline. Dozens of high executives were already seated around a very long mahogany table. The atmosphere was solemn and tense. At the head, next to the presidential seat, was an empty armchair destined for the new direction. Shortly after Preston and Candace took their seats, the double doors at the back opened wide. Vance entered with his aura of indisputable power. Everyone present stood up as a sign of respect. Vance walked slowly until positioning himself next to the empty chair and gestured for them to sit. Good morning. Today is a crucial day for this holding company. As you were already informed, I am going to designate the person who will take the helm of operations, who will direct our market strategy, and who will be in charge of purging all the rot that has been hiding in these offices, announced Vance with his baritone voice bouncing off the windows. His eyes locked for an instant on Preston, causing his heart to skip a beat. I won't beat around the bush. Let's welcome your new chief operating officer. Come in. Vance extended his hand toward the door. All heads turned toward the entrance. The rhythmic tapping of heels on the marble resonated with a firm and overwhelming cadence. A figure crossed the Frohman threshold, radiating lethal elegance and undeniable authority. Preston leaned forward to see who his new superior was, but when the figure stopped under the Plimer spotlights of the room, Preston's breath cut off suddenly. He opened his eyes wildly. His tanned complexion lost all color, turning paler than lime. He went rigid like a board, feeling his blood freeze in his veins. The woman walking toward the head to sit next to Vance was Eleanor. A sepulchral, thick, and suffocating silence took over the boardroom. Not a single murmur, not a slight throat clearing. The executive's breath seemed to have stopped. All gazes scrutinized Eleanor while she skirted the mahogany table. With extreme elegance, Preston remained petrified in his chair. He had his jaw locked and mouth slightly open, in a state of absolute shock. His brain refused to process the blank. Hassa devium est, seen. The woman he had humiliated the night before, whom he had treated like a maid for years, was now the ultimate operational authority of the company. Candace, seated a few feet from him, experienced an identical reaction. Her face tensed, and her hands clung to the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. She remembered her cruel words toward Eleanor at the party. Panic seized her entrails upon understanding that the woman she had insulted now had absolute power to strike down her career. Vance sketched an imperceptible smile, noting the reactions, delighting, especially in Preston's cadaverous countenance. He pulled back the presidential chair and gestured to Eleanor to take a seat. When she settled in and swept the Duber room with her gaze, Vance took the floor. I present to you, Madam Eleanor. From this very instant, she is the chief operating officer in command of all corporate operations and expansion strategy. Her word is my word. Whoever opposes her will be facing me directly. All yours, Eleanor. This room belongs to you, affirmed Vance before withdrawing toward an end of grass. Observer seat in the corner, ceding absolute prominence to her. Eleanor nodded, politely toward him, and then fixed her sight on the attendees. Her look was penetrating and majestic, without an iota of insecurity. She touched a touchscreen panel on her table, and immediately the huge screen in the background illuminated the room with financial graphs, balance sheets, and detailed market projections. Preston swallowed hard. It was the entire Project Hudson, the same document that had earned him his promotion. Good morning. I am not in favor of empty speeches, so we will get straight to the point. This group is about to execute a strategic plan of highest priority, christened as Project Hudson. I have audited all the reports and have found numerous anomalies that we must clarify today, began Eleanor, projecting her voice with firmness to dominate the space. She pressed a button, and a complex table of costs appeared on screen. Then, she turned her head to look directly at Preston, down whose forehead drops of cold sweat were already sliding. Mr. Preston, you are the ultimate person responsible for this project. Could you illustrate to the board the algorithm you used to calculate the net profit margin for the third quarter? Observing page 40, there exists a revenue projection that is mathematically implausible. If we cross it with the import costs of raw materials from the Midwest. You have the floor. Eleanor challenged him, giving him the opportunity to hang himself with his own rope. All faces turned toward Preston. He swallowed saliva noisily. His hands trembled under the table. He vaguely remembered page 40, but he didn't have the slightest clue where those numbers came from, as it had been Eleanor who had calculated them in the early hours. He tried to stand up, forcing a pathetic smile. Regarding those figures, we have to look at the global perspective. The domestic market is very volatile currently, and my team fully trusts that with an aggressive marketing campaign, we will reach that objective. It's a question of faith in our commercial synergies, stammered Preston, resorting to his usual repertoire of empty corporate verbiage. Eleanor smiled coldly. She pressed the remote again, revealing a budget breakdown that she herself had subtly altered before handing him the draft some time ago. Faith doesn't pay payrolls nor suppliers, Preston. You justify that figure based on marketing campaigns. However, on page 50, you yourself approve a 30% cut in the advertising budget line item. How do you intend to skyrocket sales by DBDP.A, severing your main promotional avenue? Your response makes evident that you do not understand a single line of what you yourself have signed. You lack the capacity to direct this, ruled Eleanor, bearing her husband's profound ignorance before the company's elite. A disapproving murmur ran through the table. The high-ranking officers were starting to question the facade of perfection that Preston had maintained. He ran out of arguments and let himself fall into the chair with ears red from the immense shame he felt. He was being trampled upon in front of the very colleagues who had laughed at Eleanor. Seeing Preston cornered and humiliated, Candace stood up abruptly. Her blind devotion to him clouded her reasoning. She pointed at Eleanor with her index, finger trembling with rage. "Don't listen to her. She's just a housewife without studies who knows nothing about finance. Surely she has manipulated the files to sink Preston out of personal spite. He is the most brilliant executive who has stepped in this building. You have no right to sit in that armchair and give us lessons," shrieked Candace with a strident voice that hurt everyone's ears. Several board members shifted uncomfortably at such lack of discipline, but Eleanor showed no anger or indignation. She reclined placidly in her armchair, clasped her hands, and looked at Candace with profound compassion. "I am enormously glad that you decided to intervene, Candace. It happens that I have additional material that concerns you very directly. I don't need to judge you out of spite. The raw reality will take charge of judging both of you," replied Eleanor. She took a small USB memory stick out of her jacket pocket, connected it to the table port, and executed an audio file. The screen went black and showed the waves of a sound spectrometer. The next second, an incredibly clear recording flooded the boardroom. "How about the client portfolio in the Chicago area, Candace? Have you dumped the data yet?" The unmistakable voice of Preston sounded through the speakers. "Everything in order. Our competitors in Chicago have agreed to pay us triple our annual bonus. If we pass them the encrypted file this very night, they won't notice the theft until next quarter. We're going to be rich, Preston." Candace's response oozed greed. The recording continued, exposing with great detail their plot of industrial espionage with a rival corporation in Chicago. The room exploded in indignation. The directors who before kept silence now pounded the table and shouted furiously. They couldn't believe that two people from their inner circle were criminals selling the company to the highest bidder. Those proofs were the fruit of the relentless corporate espionage ordered by Vance and handed to Eleanor the priestess's night before. Candace's face lost all color. Her bravery vanished. She stepped back several feet and her legs failed her, falling to her knees on the cold floor. She burst into tears, crawling toward the table, imploring clemency from the board members, knowing her professional life was finished and criminal courts awaited her. For his part, Preston remained anchored to the chair. His gaze was lost on the Dindrigoter desk. He assimilated with a knot in his stomach that he had suffered absolute defeat. He had nowhere to hide. Eleanor had not only annihilated his pride, but had destroyed his entire life without compassion in front of the people he respected most in the world. Preston's nightmare had just entered its darkest phase. Pandemonium broke out in the room as soon as the recording came to an end. The board members, previously circumspect, exchanged looks loaded with fury and disappointment. The initial murmurs turned into shouted recriminations directed against Preston and Candace. Stealing trade secrets and selling them to the competition constituted a very serious crime of industrial espionage that they would never tolerate. That betrayal not only meant financial disaster, but a ported stab to the corporate trust forged over decades. Several executives slammed files against the table, demanding that both traitors be handed over to the FBI that same morning. The solemn climate of the council had transmuted into the tense atmosphere of an Inquisition tribunal. In the middle of the chaos, Candace remained prostrate on the floor, shaken by violent sobs. Tears ruined the makeup she had bragged about so much. She crawled toward the director's chairs, joining her palms together in a desperate plea. She knew perfectly well that her name would enter the blacklist of every company in America. She begged aloud that they not file a criminal complaint against her, trying to shift all the blame to Preston, arguing that he had coerced and deceived her with false promises. But no one took pity on her crying, much less Eleanor, who observed her with the coldness of an iceberg. Meanwhile, Preston remained nailed to the seat, devoid of all reasoning. Sweat soaked the expensive shirt he was wearing. His bulging eyes scanned the room, encountering only gestures of disgust and contempt. Crossing eyes again with Eleanor, Preston realized something. The woman of solid principles presiding over the table held the reins of his penal destiny. He knew he had no escape against the audio evidence. He had to resort to another strategy, the lowest, emotional blackmail he could devise to soften the heart of his still wife. He stood up slowly, sketched a pathetic grimace, and looked at Eleanor with wet eyes, assuming the role of the wayward husband seeking redemption. Eleanor, listen to me for a second, please. Listen to your husband, pleaded Preston, with a hoarse and pitiful voice, feigning affliction. The room slowly fell silent, listening to his intervention. I acknowledge that I have committed very grave errors, but I beg you to remember our good moments. Remember how we fought together at the beginning of our marriage, and above all, I implore you to think of my mother. My mother adores you, Eleanor. She has always said that you are the perfect daughter-in-law. You know she has heart problems. If she finds out that I am going to end up in federal prison because of a complaint from you, her heart won't resist it. Would you be capable of sending my poor mother to the grave, locking up her only son behind bars? I beg you for her sake, withdraw those charges and let me leave without making more noise. Preston had wielded his mother's name as a last lifeline. He was fully aware of Eleanor's deep religious devotion, her immense respect for the elderly, and how affectionate she had always been with her mother-in-law. He trusted blindly that blackmail regarding his mother's health would break her determination. However, his hopes disintegrated in a fraction of a second. Eleanor's face did not experience the slightest alteration. There was no trace of doubt, nor compassion, much less fear. Eleanor stood up from the armchair, leaned both hands on the table, and glared at Preston with the hardest look she had exhibited so far. Don't you ever dare use your mother's name to cover up your crimes, Preston, hissed Eleanor with a low tone, but one that rumbled like a threat through every corner. Your mother was always proud of you. She believed you were an upstanding man. But the truth is that you are a wretch who hurts others. You have betrayed your company, trafficked with others' data, defrauded your colleagues, and you all by yourself have dynamited our marriage. Your mother, we will suffer much more discovering that the son she sacrificed so much for is a white-collar thief and an utter coward who hides under her skirts when caught. I will ensure that she lacks nothing and receives the best medical attention in Dade, private clinics. But I will also ensure that you pay for your crimes before justice. The law will follow its course, and you have run out of escape routes. Eleanor's verdict crushed the little arrogance Preston had left. The executives nodded unanimously at the new COO's forcefulness. In his corner, Vance smiled, slightly, flooded with pride, witnessing the steel nerve of the woman he had backed. Eleanor then directed her gaze to the head of security, waiting by the sector door, and ordered them to detain Preston and Candace in an adjacent room until FBI patrols arrived to proceed with their formal arrest for industrial espionage. Preston struggled in vain when two burly guards grabbed him by the arms, shouted Eleanor's name, vomiting insults and swearing revenge, but his strength was ridiculous compared to that of the escorts. Finally, they dragged him towards the exit alongside Candace. The extraordinary meeting concluded with unanimous backing for Eleanor's management and the order to cleanse the company of any collaborator of Preston's faction. Once the meeting ended, Eleanor decided to stay in her new presidential office until late at night. She had to review dozens of filing cabinets from the previous administration to certify that no more security breaches existed. Vance had offered to stay with her, but Eleanor assured him she could handle it alone and suggested he go rest at his residence. Eleanor immersed herself fully in the documents in her spacious glass-walled office on the top floor. The wall clock marked 10 p.m. Almost the entire staff had abandoned the building, plunging the tower into profound silence. Meanwhile, in a waiting room on the ground floor, Preston, taking advantage of a monumental oversight by the security guards who were coordinating with the federal agents, had managed to break free. His mind was clouded by desperation. He knew for certain that the only damning evidence of the data theft resided on the USB memory stick that Eleanor guarded jealously. If he managed to seize the flash drive and destroy it, the prosecution would have serious problems. Sustaining the accusation, using a master access card that hadn't yet been deactivated, Preston snuck up the emergency stairs and began climbing toward the top floor. He knew the building layout perfectly. Upon arriving at the executive hallway, he went swiftly to the main electrical panel. Moved by adrenaline, he threw the main breaker switch with a slap of his hand. Inside the office, Eleanor was startled when darkness engulfed her suddenly. The computer turned off and lights vanished. The silence became oppressive. Believing it was a simple power outage, she turned on her mobile phone flashlight to illuminate the table, but an instant later, the hair on her arms stood on end. From the long exterior hallway came the echo of heavy footsteps approaching, slowly. The steps were followed by the sound of a dismal laugh bouncing against the walls. A laugh that was familiar and terrifying to her. It was Preston. The tapping of shoes against the marble approached closer and closer, sounding like a lethal omen in the entrails of the empty office tower. Eleanor stayed still, behind the mahogany table. Her heart was going 1,000 miles an hour, but she fought fiercely to contain panic. She knew her husband was mean, but never imagined he would have the guts to physically assault her right there. Groping in the gloom, she located the small flash drive and hid it, closing her fist tightly. She would protect that proof at all costs. The noble wood door opened with a brutal blow. The immense silhouette of a man blocked the scarce moonlight filtering through the large windows. He entered panting fiercely. The scarce luminosity allowed a glimpse of Preston's dislocated and wild face. His bloodshot eyes fixed there. Gaze onher. Did you think you had won, Eleanor? His voice ripped the silence, grave and pregnant with hate. Did you think you could destroy my career and then sit so comfortably in this armchair? You were wrong. You don't know what I'm capable of. She straightened her back, refusing flatly to show weakness before her abuser. She returned an imperturbable look. I know I am in front of a coward who has failed in his own plans. Turn yourself in, Preston. Building security will already know you have escaped. You're only digging your own judicial grave climbing up here. Preston let out a dismal laugh. He advanced, circling the huge office table in an attempt to corner her. Those useless fools downstairs won't catch me until I Get what I came looking for. Give me that damn flash drive right now. It's the only proof they have to nail me. Give it to me, and I will disappear from your sight forever. If you refuse, I swear this will be your last night in the Kurd company. I am never going to give it to you, replied Eleanor, stepping back to gain distance from the disturbed man. You are going to pay for all the damage you have caused. And I don't speak just of mine, but of the millionaire fraud to the holding company. You're going to rot in prison, Preston. The flat refusal unleashed the executive's irrational fury. He lost his temper completely. With a sudden movement, he lunged at her, trying to grab the hand where she guarded the proof. Eleanor jumped aside, trying to break free, but desperation granted him brutal strength. He managed to trap her wrist and squeezed with such viciousness that she made a grimace of pain. "Let me go, wretch!" shouted Eleanor, pulling back with all her strength. "Let go of the damn flash drive, stubborn woman." "Always embittering my life," roared he, about to twist her arm to force her to open her hand. But a second before he achieved his goal, the emergency lights and fluorescent ceiling lights turned on suddenly, flooding the office with blinding light. The sudden flash forced Preston to squint and relax his grip slightly. Unisonously, a thunder of heavy steps galloping thundered the hallway. "Freeze right there, Preston. Get your dirty hands off her." A thunderous and authoritarian voice exploded from the threshold. It was Vance, encased in his dark coat, giving off devastating anger. Just behind him, several FBI agents, with their regulation uniforms, burst in like a whirlwind, hands ready to intervene. Vance didn't stop. He crossed the office with long strides, grabbed Preston by the coat lapels with unheard of strength, and threw him through the air against the wall. He placed himself immediately as a human shield in front of Eleanor, turning his face for an instant to check the woman's condition. His anger transformed into intense relief upon seeing she wasn't seriously injured. The federal agents pounced on Preston, who was moaning on the floor. Two agents twisted his arms behind his back and placed handcuffs on him, blocking any feint of resistance. Preston twisted like a wounded animal with cheek squashed against the marble floor. He shouted crazily, unable to assimilate his absolute failure. "You have no right. That money is mine. They owe me those $3 million, he vociferated beside himself, blinded by greed and delirium. Given the commotion, an FBI inspector stepped forward. He extracted from his jacket a judicial warrant duly sealed by the Southern District of New York, federal court, and put it before the detainee's eyes. The inspector looked at him with absolute severity. "Preston, listen attentively. You are detained under accusation of 3 serious crimes. First, a continued crime of disclosure of company secrets and industrial espionage. Second, aggravated fraud. And third, attempted robbery with violence and intimidation that this patrol just witnessed," recited the inspector with professionalism and forcefulness. He pointed to the document. "Regarding your monetary claim, I inform you that this writ is an order for preventive embargo of assets. Having deliberately infringed the clauses of the corporate guarantee and incurred in fraud against the company, the judge has ordered the IRS to seize your accounts. Your estate, your car, and your bank balance remain embargoed from this minute to satisfy the millionaire penalty claimed against you. You have just been left destitute, Mr. Preston." Preston stopped fighting. His gaze went empty, fixed on the official seal of the decanned document. Those words demolished him like a wrecking ball. His seized heritage, his brilliant future shattered, and the panorama of spending years in the shade with a monstrous debt on his back. His whole body went slack. He had lost energy to shout. All his sickening presumption vanished. The agents pulled him and dragged him out. Passing in front of Eleanor and Vance, he buried his chin in his chest, not daring to cross glances with the wife he had trampled and auctioned in public. Now she remained erect, witnessing his sinking. Eleanor watched him move away without shedding a single tear. Justice had been done, and that endless night culminated with immense peace in her soul. The federal courthouse in Manhattan gave off a glacial atmosphere full of solemnity. The gazes of those present dissected the man occupying the dissected the man, defendant's bench. Preston wore worn sports clothing. His face was haggard, and he had lost several pounds since entering preventive prison. Of the haughtiness that characterized him so much, not even scraps remained. It was the day of the Quand, reading of the judicial ruling for very grave crimes of corporate espionage and fraud. The presiding judge presided over the court high on the dais, about to shatter what little remained of Preston's future. Mutism prevailed, while the Plosen.com judge related proven facts, clandestine data transfers to Chicago, and incriminatory audios provided by Vance's private accusation. Every phrase of the Ploslov judge was a lethal thrust. Preston's defense, assigned by public defender, hadn't been able to refute such a solid file. In another bench a short distance away, Candace cried without consolation. The one who was an unconditional ally in mockeries against Eleanor now glared at Preston with a look loaded with rancor. In her turn for last word, Candace pointed him out before tribunal as brain of plot, alleging having been manipulated and coerced by him. That disloyalty finished sinking Preston, psychologically confirming him that his flatterers had only loved his checkbook and executive position. In his ruin, everyone repudiated him like a plague. Victim. The climax arrived when magistrate pronounced condemnatory ruling. Judge's voice resonated severe, condemning Preston to penalty of 15 years. Imprisonment in federal prison system for crimes of aggravated fraud and disclosure of company secrets. Gavel hit wood. That blow buried any hope. Preston crumbled in wooden chair, being shadow of man he was. But penal punishment paled before civil ruling. Magistrate ratified definitive, preventive embargo of all his patrimony by American justice to cover indemnification of fraudulent contract. His luxurious estate, high-end vehicle, and all his funds remained confiscated. Supposed future millionaire was officially insolvent with unassumable lifelong debt. Days after penal trial, Preston had to face last and most painful trance in family courts. Guarded by federal marshals and handcuffed, he was led to hearing of his contested divorce, interposed by Eleanor. He entered, dragging feet. There awaited Eleanor serene, encased in sober tailored suit with exquisite lace scarf at neck. She emanated infinite peace in counterposition to pitiful state of convict. Upon initiating preliminary hearing, judge formulated routine question about whether possibility of agreement existed between parties. Preston saw there a desperate handhold. He let himself fall to knees and desperate handhold, prostrated himself inches from Eleanor's feet. Marshall made feint to intervene, but she raised hands slightly to stop him, allowing Preston to continue. He raised, face soaked in tears, throwing dignity overboard before ex-partner. Eleanor, please, I ask you. Give me second opportunity, withdraw this. I already know I have committed unforgivable aberrations, but don't throw me in trash. I have no one else in world. They have taken everything from me. Friends, avoid me, and 15 years await me in federal prison. If you leave me, life no longer has sense. Think of my poor mother's heart. It will hurt in soul that this marriage ends like this. Forgive me, my love. I beg you, whimpered Preston with nasal voice. His pathetic laments bounced in small court, but slid off Eleanor's armor. She scrutinized him with analytic, glacial look, empty of any glimmer of pity, empathy. One day, professed him, died under spotlights of that Met Gala. She let him whimper a while. So, he tasted humiliation in own flesh. Once Preston's sobs waned slightly, Eleanor leaned forward, approached lips to ex-husband's ear, making sure no one else heard. What she was going to say, judge and guards observed scene with expectation. Eleanor took air, and with lethal and slow softness, whispered lapidary phrase, perforated eardrums and reasoning. Preston's eyes orbited, as if just seen. Devil himself. Air didn't reach lungs, pulse accelerated unnaturally before. Mixture of shame and definitive sinking began trembling, convulsively wanted to. Articulate word, but voice didn't come out. Second later. World spun consciousness. Abandoned. Completely collapsed. Face down against court tiles. Agents came, hurriedly succor fainting convict, while Eleanor recovered erect posture in imperturbable chair, letting magistrate dictate divorce. Sentence forever phrase. Eleanor murmured that day. Continued hammering Preston's brain incessantly even. Year later, had become eternal punishment, consuming mental health. You auctioned me for $10. But today, I am not even willing to buy you for a penny. That poisoned dart was coup de grace, revealed authentic value inferior to dust. A year passed since that trial. Preston suffered hard rigor of prison life. He woke up early morning, in cell dressed in commissary tracksuit, performed cleaning, jobs imposed in unit. Arrogant executive of Wall Street now spent hours scrubbing communal toilets of federal prison, penetrating smell of industrial disinfectant and humidity, new designer perfume, other inmates knowledgeable of motive. Big finance shot fallen in disgrace, crushed him without mercy that same afternoon pair. Voluminous prisoners overturned bucket on purpose, demanding laughter, clean everything again. He swallowed hard, lowered head, tears showing, pride, triturated night. Lying thin foam mattress, watched ceiling look lost. Repentance burned entrails, eternally paying just price. Abject betrayal. While Preston withered, Eleanor's star shone like never before under directive baton. Vance. Corporate profitability. Pulverized all previous records. Perspicacity, unbreakable work ethics, leadership inspired absolute loyalty, shareholders, employees, indisputable, female reference, financial circles, America personal, sphere holding, assigned lifelong property mansion, Westchester gratification, business milestone achieved, residence boasted, leafy gardens, murmuring fountains, under shade, oaks, spring afternoon, Eleanor enjoyed balcony, soft breeze admired. Catskill Mountains distance, felt deeply at peace without heavy emotional. Backpacks back. Justice finally restored balance, while delighted twilight over. New York heard known steps approaching, rear window turning. Found Vance dressed, casual but equal seductive. Always. Daily treatment. Last year. Cemented, unbreakable. Connection. Mutual respect. Extraordinary no longer saw. Only boss greater, confidant protector. Vital partner Vance approached leaning forearms wrought iron, railing, contemplating orange horizon together. Complicit silence enveloped then, turned toward looking eyes. Mixture profound, admiration, tenderness, frontier. Laboral intimate blurred completely. Year ago contemplated exceptional woman. Despised. Publicly afternoon. Looking same woman. Top world guiding destiny. Hundreds. Brilliance. Amazing. Vance said tone. Warm. Eleanor dedicated smile full. Gratitude. All this impossible. Without trust. Hand extended dreadful night. Opened. Door. Rediscover. Courage. Believed. Extinct. He shook head slightly. Took gently. Hands. Woman caressed. I gave no courage. Eleanor. Force. Vital inhabited interior. Soul merit. Remove. Blindfold. Others. Appreciate greatness. Cabo. Loose. Fateful night. Wish tie today. Pallas Sibelius shouted. Wanted. By. Obviously. Ruse. Destroy. Miserable husband. Home front. New York sky. Nobody. Judge. Desire. Rectify words. Continued Vance. Deepening timbre voice. Stepped back. Half step. Without letting go. Hands. Nailed eyes. Directive. Not entered life. By Eleanor honorability. Intelligence. Integrity. Moral. Incalculable value. All gold Fort Knox suffice match. Immense worth. Entered life. Venerate. Protect. Walk. Side marry. Build new destiny. Together? Proposed Vance, declaring pure intentions without iota doubt. Eleanor's eyes shone. Moistened listening proposal. Formulated absolute respect, sincere. Admiration. Abyss. Separated moment. Somber. Past. Woven humiliations. Proposition. Flourished equity. Unconditional affection. True matrimonial devotion, immense. Spiritual stillness. Nested chest. Suffering. Your seemed mere toll enormous. Rejoicing held. Vance gaze, nodding slowly radiant smile drew lips. Yes. Accept. Eleanor answered voice. Sweet, firm words. Supposed golden brooch. Vital trajectory. Woman treated spoilage. Tried. Undersell, elite Manhattan. Embraced true love man. Honored existence. Triumph belonged. Body. Soul. Painful preterite. Rotted prison. Cell-paying deserved penitentiary penitence. Many thanks accompanying outcome. Narrative, hopefully. Narration today, entertained, provided teaching remembered. Actions, always consequences. Enjoyed story. Forget, click like, subscribe, activate, notification bell. Miss, next stories, channel, secrets of marriage. See soon.